The photograph sat face down on the kitchen table like something shameful. Violet Ashmore had put it there herself, unable to look at it any longer, unable to throw it away either. Her brother had taken it at last summer's church picnic, and when she'd finally seen it developed, she understood why men's eyes slid past her at socials the way water slides off stone. Not ugly, just unremarkable. The kind of woman people's gazes moved through on their way to something worth looking at. She was 26 years old and had spent most of those years in a farmhouse outside Billings, Montana, cooking for a father who barely noticed, and two younger sisters who borrowed her dresses without asking and returned them with the hems undone. The advertisement in the newspaper had been a mistake. She knew that now. What she didn't know was that the man who'd answered it was already on a train heading toward her. The Ashmore farmhouse smelled like wood smoke, and the particular silence that comes from a family that has run out of things to say to each other. Violet stood at the kitchen window the morning the letter came, watching frost climb the lower corners of the glass. Her sister Pauline was in the yard with the Granger boy, laughing at something he'd said with her whole body, the way pretty girls learned to laugh before they were old enough to understand what it meant. Her younger sister Dottie was still in bed. Dottie was always still in bed. Their father, Gerald Ashmore, set the mail on the counter without looking at it. He was a man who had outlived his tenderness and didn't seem to notice the vacancy it left. Violet sorted through the envelopes. A bill from the feed store, a circular, and then a letter addressed in handwriting she didn't recognize, the letters deliberate and even, like a man who'd taught himself to write and took it seriously. Miss V. Ashmore, Silver Creek Ranch, Harney County, Oregon. Her hands went cold. 3 weeks earlier, Pauline had found the newspaper in Violet's room. The one with the advertisement circled in pencil, a rancher in Oregon seeking a capable woman for marriage. Practical terms, honest intentions. Violet had circled it in a moment of weakness and hidden it under her winter stockings, which meant Pauline had found it immediately because Pauline found everything. What followed was the kind of laughter that leaves marks. Pauline had read the advertisement aloud at the dinner table while their father stared at his plate. Dottie had laughed until she coughed. Someone, probably Pauline, had written the response letter as a joke. They'd told Violet about it afterward, expecting her humiliation, expecting her to cry or beg them to send a correction. Instead, she had gone very quiet, which scared them more. She took the letter to the barn because it was the only place on the property that was hers in any real sense. She'd been the one to muck it out every winter since she was 12. She figured she'd earned the privacy. The letter inside was written on plain paper, nothing fancy. Miss Ashmore, I received your inquiry regarding my advertisement. I'll say up front that I'm not a man who goes in for lengthy correspondence, so I'll keep this short. I'm 34 years old. I own a cattle ranch in Harney County, Oregon, about 16 miles from the nearest town, which isn't much. I have a daughter, age 8, who needs more than I can give her on my own. My wife passed 4 years ago. I'm not looking for love, I want to be honest about that, but I'm looking for someone steady, someone who won't fold the first hard winter, someone who'll be fair to my girl. In return, I can offer a sound house, honest work, and a man who keeps his word. If this arrangement interests you, I'll send train fare. If it doesn't, I understand and wish you no difficulty. Respectfully, Cade Merritt. Violet read it 4 times. Then she sat in the dark hay, smelling quiet, and cried, not from sadness but from the shock of being addressed like a person with a mind worth consulting. He hadn't described what he was looking for in terms of appearance, hadn't mentioned youth or beauty, or any of the things men usually listed first. Steady. Won't fold. Fair to my girl. She walked back to the house and told her family she was going. The silence that fell over the dinner table was different from the usual kind. Pauline recovered first. You can't go to Oregon for a man you've never met. You don't know anything about him. I know he was honest in his letter, Violet said. That's more than I can say for most people I do know. Her father set down his fork. You're serious? She looked at him across the table, this man who had watched her disappear into the housework for 7 years without once asking if she was all right. Yes, she said. I'm serious. What followed was 3 weeks of her family cycling through disbelief, guilt, and half-hearted attempts at dissuasion. Pauline apologized, genuinely and poorly, the way people apologize when they're more sorry about consequences than causes. Dottie cried. Her father went very quiet in a way that might have been feeling and might have been indigestion. Violet packed her trunk. She wrote to Cade Merritt and told him she would come, and she told him something else. That it had been her sisters who'd sent the original letter, not her, and that she understood if that changed things. His reply arrived in 6 days. Miss Ashmore, I appreciate you telling me that. Doesn't change my answer. I asked for someone honest, and you just proved you are. Train fare enclosed. The journey takes 3 days. Bring warm clothes. Harney County winters are not polite about it, Cade Merritt. The train west felt nothing like escape. That surprised her. She had expected relief or terror or some dramatic rearrangement of her insides. Instead, she felt something quieter and harder to name, the particular steadiness that comes from having made a decision that couldn't be undone. A woman in the adjacent seat, traveling to meet her own husband in Idaho, studied Violet for a long moment before she spoke. You going toward something or away from something? Violet considered it. Both, I think. The woman nodded like that was the right answer. Only honest reason to get on a train. On the second day, somewhere in the open country of Idaho where the land went flat and enormous, and started to look like it could hold more sky than any single person could reasonably absorb, Violet pressed her forehead to the cold window and thought about worse cases. Cade Merritt could be cruel. The ranch could be falling to pieces. The daughter could hate her. She could fail at every practical task required of her and confirm everyone's lowest expectations. Even then, she couldn't make herself regret leaving. The station at Harney Junction was a single wooden platform and a building that looked embarrassed to call itself a depot. 3 people waited on the platform. Violet stepped down from the train with her carpet bag and looked at them. She knew him at once. He stood apart from the others, hat pulled low, arms at his sides rather than crossed, which she would learn later was how he looked when he was making an effort. Tall, broader than she'd imagined. His face was weathered in the specific way of men who worked outside in all seasons, not old exactly, but shaped by weather and use. He had dark eyes and a jaw set in what looked like careful neutrality, and when he saw her he didn't look away. Miss Ashmore, Mr. Merritt. They looked at each other for a moment without speaking. He didn't seem disappointed, which she hadn't expected to matter as much as it did. Wagons this way, he said. We've got a long drive. He loaded her trunk without asking for help, did it efficiently, and helped her up to the wagon seat with one hand without making a production of it. Then he climbed up beside her and they set out onto a road that quickly narrowed into something more like a suggestion than a road. They didn't speak for the first mile. How was the journey? He asked finally. Long, she said, but fine. He nodded. Oregon takes some getting used to. The sky's different here. She looked up. The sky was enormous, pale at the edges, a particular shade of winter blue she'd never seen over Montana. Different how? He thought about it seriously before answering. More of it, he said. It was the first thing he said that made her feel something she couldn't quite name. The ranch appeared over a low rise, larger than she'd expected. Solid, a 2-story house with a new-looking roof and a barn that had clearly been repaired recently. Outbuildings, fenced pastures. A dog that came tearing toward them from the direction of the barn, and then skidded to a polite stop about 10 feet out, like it had remembered its manners at the last possible moment. That's General, Cade said. He's mostly decent. A child appeared in the doorway of the house. 8 years old, dark-haired like her father, with an expression of profound assessment that she must have been born with, because no 8-year-old learned that look from instruction. Is that her? The girl called. Rosalie. Cade's voice was a warning. The girl came down the porch steps anyway. She stopped in front of Violet and looked at her for a long moment with those serious dark eyes. You're not what I thought, she announced. Violet crouched down to be at eye level with her. What did you think? The girl considered. More like Cousin Mabel. She wears a lot of ribbons. I don't have any ribbons, Violet said. Rosalie looked at her with something that might have been approval. Good, she said. I'll show you where everything is. She grabbed Violet's hand and pulled her toward the house. Behind them, Violet heard Cade Merritt make a sound that was almost a laugh, quickly suppressed. The house was clean and sparse and cold in the particular way of houses that have been kept up without being loved. No curtains, no rugs. Everything functional, nothing warm. Rosalie narrated every room with the focused energy of a child who had been waiting a long time for someone to talk to. This is the kitchen. Papa burns things, but he doesn't admit it. This is the parlor. We don't use it. This is where I sleep. This is where the dog sleeps. Don't tell Papa, this is your room. Violet's room was small and clean with a window facing east. Someone had left a pitcher of water and a folded blanket on the bed. She suspected it was Cade. She suspected he would never mention it. When he appeared in the doorway, she said, "The house needs curtains." He blinked. All right, and a rug in the parlor. It echoes. He looked at the room as though considering it for the first time. I hadn't noticed. I know. He studied her for a moment. Then, supper's your territory now, if you're willing. Rosalie eats at 6. I'll be in from the barn by 5:30. I'll be ready, she said. He nodded, left without saying anything else. She stood in the room that was hers now and looked at the eastern window and thought about the word home and how much work it took to make a place earn it. The first week was careful. Violet learned the stove, which ran hot, and had opinions about it. She learned that Rosalie talked constantly when comfortable and went silent in a particular carved stone way when she was anxious. She learned that Cade said less than he meant and meant more than he said, that he was the kind of man whose care showed up sideways, in firewood left on the porch before she'd asked, in the way he always held General back when she passed through the barn door so the dog wouldn't jump. She learned that she was being watched, not by Cade, though his attention was constant in its quiet way. By the town. Her first Sunday at the Harney Junction church confirmed it. The women were polite in the specific manner of people who have already decided their opinion and are only being polite as a formality. She saw it in the way their eyes moved over her, measuring her against whatever they'd expected, whatever story they'd already told themselves about the woman Cade Merritt had sent for. She wore a plain dress and said please and thank you, and answered questions briefly. She did not try to charm them. That had never been in her skill set, and she'd stopped mourning it years ago. A woman found her by the side of the church, standing in the cold air after the service, 50-ish, sturdy, with the direct gaze of someone who charged for her opinions and considered them fairly priced. "You're doing the right thing, not trying to win them over," the woman said. "I'm Harriet Fulton. I run the dry goods store, and I'm also, depending on who you ask, the town's single honest person." Violet almost smiled. High praise. "I've been watching Cade Merritt for 4 years," Harriet said, "since Margaret died. Watched him fold himself smaller and smaller, trying to be enough for Rosalie on his own." She paused. "That girl needs a mother. He needs a partner. I'm glad you came. You don't know anything about me." "I know you've been here a week and the curtains are already up," Harriet said. "And this morning Rosalie told me her new mother makes the best biscuits in Oregon." "She said that?" "She said it very seriously. Rosalie doesn't joke about biscuits." Violet looked at the church ladies still gathered in small, careful groups, watching her from a comfortable distance. "What do they say about me?" "What you'd expect. Mail-order wife, practical arrangement. Poor Cade, settling." Harriet's expression was neutral. "Is it settling?" Violet thought about the way Cade had listened to her describe a better system for organizing the root cellar. The way he hadn't interrupted or condescended or explained that he'd been doing it fine without her. The way he'd just said, "That makes sense. Let's do it that way." "No," she said. "I don't think it is." Harriet nodded once. "Good. Then stop worrying about what they say and get back to what you're doing, which, from what I can tell, is working." The ranch worked her. That was the only honest way to describe it. She cooked and cleaned and organized and mended and helped manage the household accounts, which she discovered were in better shape than Cade let on, because Cade Merritt was not a man who complained. She learned to read his silences, which required considerable study. There was the silence that meant he was thinking. There was the silence that meant he was troubled. There was the silence he deployed when Rosalie was tired and pushing, and he was choosing patience over correction. It was different from the silence of her father's house. That silence had been absence. This one had weight. She was hanging laundry on a Thursday afternoon 2 months in, when she heard the argument from the direction of the south pasture. 2 voices, one belonging to a ranch hand named Perry, who was young and confident in the unreliable way of young confident men, and the other belonging to a man she didn't know, weathered, short-tempered, insisting Perry had moved a fence marker. By the time she reached them, they had progressed from voices to postures, the kind of postures that precede fists by about 30 seconds. She stepped between them. Both men went quiet. Perry looked surprised. The other man, who she would learn was a neighboring rancher named Dix Calloway, looked like he was deciding whether to be offended. "What's this about?" she asked. "Fence line dispute," Perry said. Dix Calloway's jaw worked. "Your man moved my marker. I didn't." "Stop," Violet said. She looked at Dix Calloway steadily. "Mr. Calloway, Dix Calloway, Mr. Calloway, if there's a genuine boundary dispute, it needs to be resolved with a survey, not a fistfight. We can arrange that." She looked at Perry. "And if you move that marker, intentionally or not, that's something to bring to Mr. Merritt, not to settle out here." A beat of silence. "You're the mail-order wife," Dix Calloway said. It wasn't quite an insult. "I'm Violet Merritt," she said, "and this is our property." She met his eyes calmly. "I'll have my husband send word to the county about a survey. If the line is where you say it is, we'll make it right. If it isn't, we'll expect the same from you." Calloway looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his hat, which had come off somewhere in the confrontation, put it back on his head, and left without speaking. Perry let out a breath. "That could have gone badly." "It didn't," she said. "Go back to work." That evening, Cade came in from the barn and found her in the kitchen and stood for a moment with his hat in his hands. "Perry told me what happened with Calloway. She put the cornbread in the oven. He had a legitimate concern about the boundary. A survey will settle it, I know." He was quiet for a moment. "He's not a bad man, just territorial. Most people are," she said, "about the things that matter." He was quiet. She heard him set his hat on the hook by the door. "Thank you," he said. She didn't make it a bigger moment than it was. She just said supper in 20 minutes, and he went to wash up. But that night, when she was darning a sock in the kitchen by lamplight and Rosalie was asleep, and the house had settled into its particular quiet, Cade came in and poured himself coffee and sat across from her and didn't leave. Can I ask you something? He said. She didn't look up from the sock, of course. Why did you really come? Not the practical version, the real one. She set the darning down, thought about it honestly. Because I was disappearing, she said. Not dramatically, just slowly. Every year, a little less of me was taking up space. I was useful in my family's house, but I wasn't seen. And I got to a point where I thought, if I stay, in 10 years there won't be enough of me left to matter. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, Margaret wanted to leave. She looked at him. Not me, not specifically. Just here. She grew up in Portland, thought she could manage ranch life, and found out she was wrong. And by the time she understood that, we had Rosalie. He looked at his hands. She wasn't unhappy all the time, but she was unhappy enough, and I kept thinking I could fix it, change it, make it right. I couldn't. Violet said nothing. When she died, I thought, that's on you. You brought her here. You kept her here. He exhaled. I didn't advertise for 3 years because I thought I had no right to bring another woman into something this hard. What changed? She asked. Rosalie, he said simply. She needs someone I can't be for her. Violet looked at him across the table, this careful, quiet man who blamed himself for things that had more than one cause. You couldn't have known, she said. I knew she was struggling. Knowing someone struggles and causing their struggle aren't the same thing, she said. She held his eyes. I came here because I chose to. Whatever happens here is mine to own just as much as it's yours. He looked at her for a long moment. You're not invisible here, he said. The words landed somewhere important. She felt them settle. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. After a while, he picked up his coffee cup and went to bed, and she sat with the darning and the lamplight, and the particular feeling of being somewhere that might, with enough time, become real. The trouble came in February, the way trouble in ranch country tended to, cold and without warning. His name was Forrest Wyndham, and he owned the largest cattle operation in Harney County by a method that involved patience and bad faith in roughly equal measure. He'd been eyeing Cade's water access for 2 years, according to Harriet, who knew everything. The creek that ran through the south quarter of the Merritt land was the only reliable water source for 5 miles in any direction. Wyndham had been buying up neighboring properties and quietly pressuring whoever was left. He paid his first visit on a Tuesday afternoon when Cade was out checking the herd. Violet saw him coming from the kitchen window. Fine horse, expensive coat, the particular walk of a man who had learned that money could be carried like a posture. Mrs. Merritt, he said from the porch steps. His smile was generous and practiced. I'm Forrest Wyndham. I expect your husband's mentioned me. He hasn't, she said. That surprised him. He recovered quickly. I came to introduce myself and to mention that I've made your husband an offer on the south quarter, a fair one. I'm not aware of any such offer. I spoke to him before your arrival. He turned me down, but circumstances change. He looked at her with something between assessment and condescension. Ranch life is hard on women, especially women who aren't accustomed to it. If your husband reconsidered, I could make sure the terms included enough for you both to start fresh somewhere easier. She looked at him steadily. Mr. Wyndham, yes. This ranch isn't for sale. Everything has a price. That may be true, she said. But not everything has a seller. She kept her voice even. My husband will be back by 4. You're welcome to wait and discuss it with him, but I'll tell you now that my answer and his will be the same. Wyndham's smile didn't change, but something behind it did. You're more difficult than I expected. I get that often, she said. He left. She stood on the porch and watched him go, and then went inside and wrote down everything he'd said, every word, in the order he'd said it, because she'd learned from watching her father negotiate with men like this that the details mattered later. When Cade came home, she told him. He sat at the kitchen table and read her notes, and his jaw did the thing it did when he was controlling something he'd rather not. He's been waiting for an opening, he said. I know. She sat across from him. What's the actual situation with the water rights? He looked at her. The county filed a survey in '68 that puts the creek squarely on our land. But Wyndham's been contesting it through a lawyer in Portland who found an earlier survey with a different line. He's planning to file in the spring. Which survey is accurate? Ours, Cade said flatly. I've got an old-timer, rancher named Augustin Vey, been in this county since '53. He remembers when that creek changed course. There was a flood, a big one, in '61, moved the channel south about 40 yards, right into what's now Wyndham's preferred boundary. Then we need Augustin Vey's testimony in writing, she said. Cade looked at her. Written and witnessed and filed with the county before Wyndham files anything, she continued. Get there first. She paused. Is there a lawyer in Junction? Closest real one is in Burns. Send for him this week. She met his eyes. We're not giving Wyndham time to set the terms. Something shifted in his expression. He was quiet for a moment then. You're good at this. I had years of watching men take things from other people because they moved faster, she said. I got tired of watching. Cade got up, and for a moment he just looked at her, Not the assessing look from the first day, but something different, something more open. Then he put on his coat and went to send word to Burns. They spent 3 evenings that week at the kitchen table, with maps and deed records. Rosalie, doing her schoolwork at the other end of the table, periodically asking questions that turned out to be more useful than expected, because 8-year-olds remember things adults forget to write down. Papa, she said on the second night, didn't old Mr. Vay give you something? A piece of paper. I remember you put it in the tin box. Cade stared at her, the tin box in the barn. He went out in the dark and came back with a battered document, water-stained at one corner, dated 1863. A hand-drawn map of the creek course as it had run before the flood. Augustin Vay's signature at the bottom. Rosalie looked at it seriously. Is that good? Cade looked at Violet. Violet looked at the document. That's very good, she said. Rosalie went back to her arithmetic with the satisfaction of someone who had done exactly what she set out to do. Wyndham sent a man by twice more that month. Violet met him both times, took notes both times, sent him off both times with nothing. The lawyer from Burns, a sharp-eyed woman named Cecily Pratt who made the drive out in weather that impressed everyone, spent 4 hours at their table and left with a stack of documentation and what Violet recognized as genuine confidence. The filing happened on a Thursday in early March, 3 weeks before Wyndham's lawyer reached the county seat. They got a letter 6 days later. The county had reviewed the documentation. Pending a formal hearing, the creek remained on the merit survey. Wyndham's contested claim was suspended. Harriet Fulton heard about it before Violet had told anyone. That woman knows things before they happen, Violet told Cade, and he said he'd been trying to figure that out for 10 years. Wyndham came himself the day after the letter arrived. No pretense this time, no expensive smile. He rode up to the house in the late afternoon when the light was going gold and hard-edged, and he looked at Violet on the porch with an expression that was trying to be contempt and was actually something closer to consternation. You moved fast, he said. You moved slow, she said. This isn't over. It might not be, she agreed, but it's over for now, and now was what mattered. She looked at him calmly. I think you should go. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the house, and at the barn, and at Rosalie, who had appeared in the doorway behind Violet with the dog sitting at her feet and her father's serious eyes taking everything in. Then he turned his horse and rode away. She heard Cade behind her a moment later, coming out from the side of the barn, where he'd been close enough to get there fast if needed. He stopped beside her and they watched Wyndham go. You knew he'd come, she said. I guessed, he said. You stayed out of it. I figured you had it. She looked at him. He was watching the road still, and his expression was the careful one, the one that was working hard to be neutral, and she had learned enough of him by then to know what it cost. You didn't have to stay back, she said. I know, he turned to look at her. But you didn't need me in front of you. You needed someone who'd be there if it went wrong. She thought about her father, who had never once positioned himself as the safety net, who had always been either the obstacle or the absence. Thank you, she said. He nodded. They went inside. That night after Rosalie was asleep, Cade found her in the kitchen putting up the last of the dishes. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She had learned his doorway silences by now. This one was the kind that preceded something he'd been thinking about for a while. I'm going to say something, he said. I might say it wrong. All right. He came into the kitchen and stood on the other side of the table, which was how he approached things that mattered, with something solid between himself and the feelings involved. I thought when I sent for you, he said, I thought this would be practical. That's the honest truth. I needed someone for Rosalie. I needed someone to manage the household. I was prepared to be fair and respectful, and I didn't expect anything more than that. She waited. I was wrong about what it would be, he said. He looked at her steadily. I don't know what to do with that exactly. I haven't let myself care about anything beyond this land and that girl for 4 years, and I'm not sure I remember how. He paused. But I'm trying to figure it out, if you're willing to wait while I do. Violet looked at him across the table. This careful man. This man who'd left water and clean linens in her room on the first day and never mentioned it. Who stayed close when things were dangerous and stepped back when she didn't need him. Who listened when she spoke. She was willing. She said, I'm not going anywhere. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding that breath for longer than the conversation. Then he said, good night, and went to bed, and she stood in the kitchen for a long moment with something warm spreading through her chest that had no useful name and didn't need one. Spring came slowly to Harney County, grudging about it the way springs were in country that took winters seriously. The pastures softened. The creek ran high with snowmelt. Calves came fast and needed watching, and Violet found herself learning to distinguish their sounds, which ones were alarmed versus hungry, versus merely expressing opinions. The formal hearing on the water rights was scheduled for late April. Cecily Pratt came back to prepare them. Augustin Vey, who was 81 and moved like he was arguing with his own joints, made the drive from his property to sign the necessary documents and to spend 3 hours at their table telling Rosalie about the flood of '61 in the specific and colorful detail of a man who'd been there and wanted credit for surviving it. Rosalie took notes. She was that kind of child. The hearing went 2 days. Violet sat in the county seat courtroom next to Cade and watched Cecily Pratt dismantle Wyndham's surveyor's testimony with the professional patience of someone who had done this before and expected to do it again. Augustin Vey testified. His 1863 map was entered as evidence. 3 other longtime county residents corroborated the flood's effects on the creek channel. The ruling came on the second afternoon. The court found in favor of the merit claim. Wyndham's contest was dismissed. Outside afterward on the courthouse steps, Wyndham passed them without speaking. He looked at Violet once, something unreadable in his face, and then looked away. She thought that was probably the last of him. Men like Wyndham didn't waste energy on losses they'd already accepted. They moved on to more winnable contests. On the drive home, Rosalie fell asleep between them on the wagon seat with her head on Violet's arm. The country was beautiful in the late afternoon light, the kind of beautiful that required difficult conditions to produce. Cade said quietly, not to wake the girl, "You changed how this went." "We changed how it went." He glanced at her. "You worked it out before I would have. The documents, getting to the county first. That was you. It was all of us," she said, "even Rosalie." He looked at his daughter sleeping between them, and his face did something it rarely did in front of other people. It went unguarded. "She's going to be something," he said. "She already is," Violet said. They drove the rest of the way home in a comfortable silence that had nothing empty about it. Summer came, and the ranch flourished in the way of places that have been fought for. They expanded the herd by 14 head. Violet started a kitchen garden that Rosalie took over with the administrative intensity she brought to everything, organizing the rows by harvest time and labeling steaks in her careful handwriting. Harriet Fulton taught Violet to preserve meat properly, came by twice to demonstrate, and the second time stayed for supper and told stories about early Harney County that kept them at the table 2 hours past Rosalie's bedtime. The church ladies came around, not dramatically, the way small-town acceptance usually happens, gradually and without announcement. One asked her advice about a difficult ranch hand. Another stopped to tell her, stiffly, that her students, Violet had begun helping the schoolteacher with Tuesday afternoon reading sessions, were coming home with better reading habits. A third simply stopped giving her the particular look that said, "You don't belong here," and that was its own kind of welcome. Cade was watching. She caught him doing it sometimes, studying her when he thought she wasn't looking, and the expression he wore wasn't what she'd expected from the early days. It wasn't assessment. It was something that looked more like wonder, like a man watching something he'd given up on turn out to be possible after all. One evening in August, after supper, after Rosalie was in bed, he came and found her on the porch. The nights were starting to cool again, the first suggestion of another winter, and the stars over Harney County were preposterous, the kind of sky that made everything feel specific and important. He stood beside her for a while without saying anything. That was his way. Then he said, "I love you. I want you to know that, not because I'm supposed to, not because of the arrangement." He paused. "Because you walked into this house and made it mean something again, and I didn't know that was what was missing until you did it." She looked at him, this man who'd held himself so carefully for so long. She said, "I know." He raised an eyebrow. "I've known for a while," she said. "I was waiting for you to figure it out." He laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere unguarded. She had heard it a handful of times, and it always surprised her how different he was in those moments, younger seeming, lighter. He took her hand. She let him. They stood there together in the big Oregon night, not talking, because sometimes things don't need language anymore. The ranch was quiet around them, the creek running somewhere, south in the dark, the cattle settled, Rosalie asleep, the house behind them warm with lamplight. She had left Billings to escape disappearing. She had not expected to find, at the end of a grudging trip on a train heading west, that she had never been disappearing at all. She had just been somewhere too small to hold what she was. Here, under this sky, with this man's hand in hers, in this house that now had curtains and rugs and a kitchen garden, and 8 years of Rosalie's rock collection lining the parlor windowsill, Violet Merritt took up exactly as much space as she'd always deserved, and not 1 inch less.